All right. Today is the last Sunday in the season of Epiphany, and it always ends with this reading on the Transfiguration, this final story where there's a transformation and revelation of who Jesus is to the world, that he is God. But I have to admit that I was today years old when I discovered that God is an Avenger, one of the Avengers. I'm so excited. I love the Avengers, right? Marvel and the Marvel Cinematic Universe is one of my favorite series of movies. And to find out in the Psalm today, in verse 8, that God is an Avenger. I mean, that just stokes my fire. I don't know how you feel about it. But speaking of great movies, I'm also a huge Lord of the Rings fan. I don't know how many of you love the Lord of the Rings. Raise your hand if you love Lord of the Rings. Just let me know who that is. Absolutely. And the movies are pretty phenomenal. And I have to say, when it comes to putting great books into movies, turning them into movies, there's often a lot of disappointment, particularly among the nerds of that book community. But people were really relatively pleased with these movies. So if I'm accused of anything in my sermon preparation, it's using too many Lord of the Rings references. So it's something that those of you here at Grace will have to just get accustomed to. I don't think I'm going to change. So it's the Battle of Helm's Deep. Do you remember the scene? The Battle of Helm's Deep. King Theoden, who has just recently been transformed in this sort of deliverance scene where Gandalf casts the evil spirit out of him, and he's sort of restored to be a warrior and a king again. There's this wonderful transformation and deliverance scene for him. King Theoden has got all of the people of his kingdom in this refuge, Helm's Deep, where they are being attacked. He's trying to protect his people against the terrifying armies of evil creatures that are coming against him and his kingdom, ready to destroy all of the people, down to the last woman and child, killing everyone. And so they are in their fortress, ready to defend it against those evil armies and the encroaching darkness that's coming against them. And the elves honor their past allegiance, and they come to fight alongside the men that King Theoden commands. And so the elves and the men are together, and they're ready to defend and fight. And they're pressed in on all sides by the evil around them. And in the battle, they get pushed further and further into the mountain where all the women and children are taking refuge. And they keep losing ground from one wall to the next wall until they're basically inside the keep and down to very few men. And when it seems like all hope is lost, there's this powerful scene where King Theoden, he says this quote, "So much death. What can men do against such reckless hate?" It's this moment where he's beginning to see the end for him and his people. And Aragorn, who's this, Christ character, is standing with him, fighting alongside him. He says to him, "Ride out with me, ride out and meet it." He's sort of bolstering King Theoden for like one last battle, one last war cry, riding out on their horses into the army of evil creatures. Theoden says, "Look at my men. Their courage hangs by a thread. If this is to be our end, then I would have them make such an end as to be worthy of remembrance." Do you remember that powerful line, obviously written by Tolkien, just this powerful line of the glorious end for a warrior? And that's what I've named this sermon, The Glorious End, because that's what Zephaniah is describing. The glorious end. Of course, in King Theoden, it's this ride into battle, end in death and fighting against evil. And to some degree, it's what every warrior sort of imagines or idealizes would be a glorious end, to die fighting, to protect those that you love, to protect the innocent, to protect our families, to fight against evil. So in the scene, they decide to mount on their horses and they ride out into the countless throng of the enemy for one last glorious thrust into the battle. before sacrificing. They imagine they're sacrificing their lives. But as they ride out, trampling the enemy underfoot, there's this fabulous scene where the sun is beginning to rise. It's like they've survived all the way through the night, but they don't know it's almost dawn. The sun rises, and earlier Gandalf had said, on the 5th day, when the sun rises, look to the east. And as the sun is rising and they are riding out into the battle, Gandalf arrives at the top of this mountain, and the sun is rising with this army of people who've come to their aid. This great army arrives just in time, in the nick of time, to sweep across the plain and to destroy the enemy with their rescuing army. I mean, Theoden and his men were within minutes of being wiped out as an entire people. Within minutes. I don't know if you've ever felt that close to the end or that close to despair. The whole scene makes you realize that if they had given in to despair too soon, if they had not held out hope long enough, then they would have been destroyed, down to the last child. That there's a power in hope to press on, to persevere, that can lead to salvation, deliverance, being rescued, if I can just hold out hope long enough. There's no story that gives me more hope and imagery for what our story can look like at the end of all things. As Zephaniah prophesies about the end of the people of Israel, we can't help but think also about our end, about the end of all things, about the end of the world. And Zephaniah hearkens to imagery that we have associated with the book of Revelation, when God comes and rescues all of humanity. And so it is a description for us of our end. So I want you to look in your bulletins with me at this passage that is such a powerful passage that we're going to actually sing some of this passage for our offertory today. We're going to teach you a little bit of a refrain from it. But this is quite dramatically in Lord of the Rings, similar to the state of things among the Israelites in the city of Jerusalem during the time that the prophet Zephaniah is proclaiming the word of God. So this is happening somewhere between 640 to 609 BC. That's when Zephaniah was doing his prophetic ministry in Judah, in the city of Jerusalem, under the king Josiah. Now, you may remember vague memories of Old Testament Bible studies. King Josiah is the one who led the reform, trying to bring Israel out of their evil practices and into a faithful following and worship of Yahweh. But before he led his reforms, this passage and proclamation by prophet Zephaniah took place. The kingdom of Israel to the north had already fallen. It had already been destroyed in and the kingdom of Israel had fallen and been destroyed in 720 BC. And then soon, in the days ahead, the kingdom of Judah would be destroyed. The end is coming quickly for Jerusalem. The sinfulness of the kingdom of Judah was at an all-time high as the prophet Zephaniah is making these proclamations. They were at war from without and from within. That was the state of things. And the end was coming for them. Death, darkness awaited them. It was not the actual end of Judah, because Zephaniah promises them a future, promises them a hope, even though things were looking very bleak for them as a people. Zephaniah prophesies about not just the end of Israel and Judah, he's prophesying about the end of all things, right? Which is why this passage is important to us. The glorious end, not just for Judah, but for us here in this room, is being described in these verses in Zephaniah chapter 3. As you look at these verses, we want to keep in mind the gospel passage that Pastor Bill read for us, the Transfiguration. Jesus, in his story at the Transfiguration, is also quickly approaching his end. right? He talks to the disciples at the very end, don't tell anyone about this until after I've died and resurrected. He's talking about his end, and death and darkness still stand in front of Jesus. He is walking steadily towards Jerusalem, same city that Zephaniah is prophesying about. And Jesus is going to meet his end. He knows what awaits him. It's not the actual end of Jesus, though, we know, on the other side of the story, just like it's not the actual end of Judah in Zephaniah's story. As a kind of foreshadowing, Jesus goes up on the mountain and he's completely transfigured. He's transformed in this way where it's, lots of scholars like to write about this. We're guessing, based on biblical scholars, that Jesus is sort of taking on his true appearance. What does the Son of God truly look like standing at the right hand of the Father? We have images from Revelation that describe the Son of Man riding on a horse, coming on a cloud, right? We have images of him shining like the sun. And so this is how the gospel writer describes Jesus in the Transfiguration, taking on perhaps his true appearance, no longer veiled by his mortal flesh. Similar to the way Moses' face had to be veiled after he had seen the glory of God and he had his own glorious countenance. The flesh no longer veiled the true appearance of Jesus, the Son of God. And for Jesus, there will be this glorious end and resurrection. A resurrection after the death and the darkness. The book of Revelation describes for us Jesus coming back and bringing everything to fulfillment. So going back to Zephaniah, he's describing the glorious end of Judah, but also for us. Instead of destroying all sinners, what I love about God's judgment and justice in the world is instead of destroying all sinners in his judgment of Israel, Judah, for their idolatry, God instead makes a way to destroy just sin, not all sinners. And he restores all creation as Zephaniah prophesies. It harkens back to the Garden of Eden and the restoration of God's presence with mankind. As Zephaniah prophesies, God will be in our midst. God will be in our midst. He will gather all who are scattered in exile, which is coming. It already exists for the people of Israel. They're already in exile in Zephaniah's time. But the people of Judah and Jerusalem are going to go into exile soon. And all of the people that were together under Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Joseph, all of the people that were together are now scattered everywhere. So this promise from Zephaniah that God will gather them all back together again, will gather us all together, the universal church, every Christian, every believer in Jesus will be gathered together. I don't know if you've ever gone to a large Christian event where there was, thousands of people present, and the music was phenomenal, and people were worshiping and praying and praising, how it felt to feel a part of something so much larger than yourself, so much larger than your own sort of life or experience, to be a part of a movement of God. That's happening right now in Asbury. I don't know if you've read on social media or even on Fox News, I think they featured a segment on the revival going on at Asbury College in Kentucky, which has several of our friends have now gone to it. And several revivals are now sparking on other college campuses. It's spreading. My prayer is, Lord, bring it west. Bring it west, Lord. We would love to see revival. It's something that many of us have prayed for. Lord, bring another great awakening in North America. Bring revival. Awaken the church and bring people who are caught in darkness or captive, bring them into the church and liberate them. Bring freedom. Set the captives free. So this large gathering, this Zephaniah prophecy is called the gathering of God's people. He will gather all who are scattered in exile and bring them together as one people. What this passage makes me think about is the families that are separated by tragedy. I don't know if you've ever been separated in your family from other family members. Kids that are going off to college, the parents that are seeing their children, their little baby boys and girls going off and living on their own. It's terrifying. I'm facing into that in the next 6 months. I'm not looking forward to it. I'm going to need people to walk me through it. It's going to be hard as Aliana disappears and goes off to Wheaton College, back to the Midwest. I also think about families that are separated by tragedies, where things like earthquakes separate families, death separates families, sickness, cancer. I also think about the sweet reunion when the families are brought back together again. So college kids come home, those that are traveling abroad for months return back together again. I also think about military families. So deployment separates families. In the military, we see that a lot here close to Camp Pendleton. For my own family growing up, my dad served in the, lots of places, but he was in the 101st Airborne Division during the Gulf War in 90, 91, 92. And that was the first time we had a Gulf War, I believe. And I was in the 8th grade, and so my dad was deployed for 9 months. He was a colonel at the time. He retired as a 2-star general. So my dad's gone for 8 months, and we get the announcement that the troops are coming home. And it was all of Fort Campbell, Kentucky's, the entire fort of soldiers were returning. So it was a big, big event. Several planes were coming in to deliver the troops back home again. And I remember being with all of the families in this hangar, and we were standing at a fence that kept us from going out onto the airstrip, and we were watching as the planes landed. And I can't even begin to describe the energy among the crowd of people waiting for their loved ones to return. Right? When military families are reunited, there's a lot of hope and fear, because not everyone is going to get good news when the plane lands. I watched families waiting for their loved one to come off the plane and wait, only to be given the bad news that their husband or their wife or their mother or father were not coming back. So there's this fear and there's this nervous energy. People are jumping up and down, they're screaming, they're banging on the fence. There's a lot of crying going on, both happy and sad crying. And a lot of folks didn't know if their loved ones were coming back. I remember my own mom pressed up against the fence, and I thought she was going to tear that fence down. When the soldiers were disembarking, and here's the crazy thing, they all look the same from a distance, so you can't tell which one's yours. Which soldier is your soldier? And you're scanning all the faces. You think you recognize your loved one. You scream, then you realize it's not him or her, right? And you keep watching. There's so much screaming, and then the embracing starts as the soldiers reach the fence and start to come through the opening. And sobbing, people collapse to the ground. Dogpiling their soldier. I remember when my dad appeared, how my mom screamed. The pitch changed when she screamed. There's this tremendous power in reunion. There's no other experience in my life that would describe the power of reunion like military families being reunited with their soldiers. There's just nothing else like it. How much more powerful will the reunion be with those who have died when God gathers us all together again? How much more powerful will that reunion be with those that we have not seen for decades? I think even for some, it's like, I don't know if I will ever see them again. How powerful will that reunion be? The glorious end that Zephaniah describes here will be a powerful reunion, not just between loved ones, but between mankind and our God. The description here is of a God who sings over us, like a father or a mother sings over their children. He quiets them with his love. He calms every fear, every anxious thought. All of these images of connection, safety, peace, well-being, they make you long for it, don't they? Longing for that kind of reconnection. In a small way, I'm guessing it's the same feeling you get when you come home after a long trip. Home. Do you know what that's like, coming home after being away for so long? In some ways, we're all traveling still, and we hope to one day come home. Verse 19 says, I will save the lame. I will gather the outcast. I will change their shame into praise and renown in all the earth. I do think as Americans, we have forgotten what it's like to live in an honor-shame culture. I think a lot of the scriptures were written in honor-shame cultures, and we don't currently really self-describe as an honor-shame culture. I think there's a downside to that. I don't know what the upsides are, but the downside is Americans seem to thrive on publicly shaming one another. I don't get that. I don't understand why we shame each other on social media or in politics. I don't understand all the mudslinging. I get it. There's competition. People want to win. But there's so much heaping shame on others. It's like we've forgotten how to honor one another. We've forgotten how to honor leaders. We've forgotten how to honor people in certain positions. I think the military is actually a culture that helps us honor. There's this, it doesn't matter if you like them or not, you honor people in the military. There's this innate culture of honor in the military that isn't there in the rest of American culture, and we really are lacking something very important. We don't know how to honor. So, you don't see presidents of the United States being honored much. You just don't. Whether you're on one side or the other of the political aisle, there's just so much shaming of leaders, so much attack constantly going on. I think it's a problem. And here, it's almost as if Zephaniah speaks to that. All of the shame that's been heaped on you, heaped on the people that you love, heaped on your president, heaped on your father, your mother, all the public shame that's come against you. Zephaniah says, I will transform into praise and renown. It's like he will reverse the shaming process and bring a public honoring to you and your family and your loved ones. This is what we miss about symbols of king or queen. There's a certain thing that comes with monarchy is there are symbols. Powerful symbols. The king and the queen are powerful symbols. I've said to my children at weddings, the bride and the groom are powerful symbols. They symbolize the king and the queen. They symbolize the prince and the princess. It's like if you see children at a wedding looking at the bride or the groom, they're just like, oh my gosh, they're larger than life. When it comes to whoever wants to dance with the bride, all the little boys or little girls want to dance with the bride. And if it's opened up to anyone can dance with the groom, all the little boys and girls want to go and dance with the groom because they're these huge symbols at the wedding. They symbolize something larger than who they are. As Christians, we know in Scripture, they symbolize the groom, Jesus, the bride, the church, right? Kings and queens, we don't have those much in our day. And so we've lost the symbol of them, right? We've lost the symbol of ceremony, which the military has and certain denominations have. I think Anglicans have some ceremony that's beautiful. We have a bishop that's a beautiful symbol of godly leadership, spiritual fatherhood, right? But by and large in our culture, we've lost symbol, we've lost the good of symbol, we've lost the good of honoring. And Jesus will restore all that has been lost. He will transform our shame, the vile things that people say about us. He will turn into praise and renown. And then This passage ends with what I think is a radioactive phrase. It's this phrase that jumps off the pages at you in verse 20. When I will restore your fortunes before your eyes. I ask my children what they think of when they read this verse. He will restore your fortunes before your eyes. You know what they said? Fortune to them isn't money or treasure. That's not fortune to my kids. One of my kids said, it's the lost opportunities. The what could have been fortunes of friendship, opportunities or great things that we didn't step into or we didn't say yes to. Isn't that profound? The lost fortunes of friendships or what could have been. God says he will restore right in front of you all that you've lost or all the doors that have been closed in your life, all of the dreams you've had to give up. He will restore your fortune right in front of you. Everything that I've lost, what have I lost? Children, jobs, health, pensions, your career, your spouse, dear friends, your reputation perhaps. God can and will restore all these things to you. Zephaniah proclaims. He will gather us together and he will start dispensing honor place of your shame. And then we can put on the garments of praise instead of a spirit of heaviness. When Jesus said in Matthew 8:20, foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place even to lay his head, I realized that he gave up his home so that we could have a home, a true home. Jesus gave up his home so that we could have a home. He told his disciples that he's going ahead of them so that he could prepare a place for them. Zephaniah is describing the place he is preparing for you. After all the darkness and the pain, the suffering and the loss, you will come home to him. He is waiting for you. Probably like the father in the prodigal son story, or like my mom was waiting at the fence in the hangar for my dad to come off the military plane. He is waiting for you like that. They will probably be shouting and singing. Maybe you'll be shouting. Maybe it'll be him who shouts.